Hey guys, today I'm going to actually walk you through how I do my corporate headshots, how I shoot and edit those corporate headshots, sometimes referred to as like, a brand shoot because these days people also do it for their social media pages to enhance that look. So right here I'm in Adobe Lightroom right now, and as you can see I did a shoot, I did a few shots, and my process is pretty simple. I like to put them in Lightroom and then I go through and sort the best ones. But here are some tips when shooting these shoots, right? So the first thing I have here, I'm using a butterfly lighting setup. If you have no idea what butterfly lighting is, I can always do another video on that, or you can, after this video, you can just go onto YouTube and find another tutorial on what butterfly lighting is. I'm also using the clamshell reflector because this is able to now reflect the light underneath the chin to kind of, get rid of some of those shadows and put a bit more light in the face. The catch light is also very important here. So the catch light is pretty much you being able to catch, the strobe or whatever reflector you're using in the eyes. So you're adding more light to the eyes because they say that the eyes are the windows to the soul. So, when you look in somebody's eyes and you can see it nice and bright, it makes the picture a bit more appealing. So as you can see here, everything here is nice and bright. So a few tips. Butterfly lighting, if you have one light, butterfly lighting is a good setup to have. Have your subject stand, a few meters away from the background so you can have some sort of separation. Use a reflector if you can get one. You don't have to use a clamshell reflector. You can always just use a regular reflector. All you do is place it underneath the model. You can also have the model hold it underneath underneath their stomach to kind of get that reflection into the eyes, right? So for me this was a one light setup, so I definitely used the butterfly lighting technique. On your camera, the settings, for me personally, I like to set a custom white balance because in studio I don't want the white balance going all over the place, so a custom white balance definitely works best for me. So I like to set mine to 5500, which matches the white light coming out of the strobe. That way the photos are consistent across the board. However, if you're shooting in RAW, which you should be shooting in RAW, and you forget to set the custom white balance, when you go here in Lightroom, you can fix that. So I made the mistake that day and I didn't shoot them in my custom white balance. So as you see, somewhere 6,250, somewhere 5,300. Now because I know that my strobe was closer to 5,500, all I did was fix it in post. So this is the before and this is the after. See, all cleaned up. You don't see the clamshell reflector anymore, and the face is refined. You can see the image nice and clear. So as you can see here, my temperature is set to 5,300. Anywhere from 5,000 to about 5,500 is good. This one is set to 6,250. What I typically do, I'll just use the eyedropper tool and I'll just tap the background. Because the background is pretty much gray, the white balance will easily balance in this setup. So that's how you're able to pretty much get the correct white balance if you forgot to shoot the right white balance. So now when you look at these two images, they're pretty much identical in terms of the color, how they look. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to use this picture as an example to show you how I go about editing this, right? So the first thing I'll do, I have it here in Lightroom. I'll just right click and I say edit in Photoshop. I'm using the 2025 version. So I say edit in Photoshop. I have some actions here. I actually bought these actions because they just made my life easier. You don't have to buy actions. You can actually create your own actions, but I just bought them because I wanted to have it easier. So this action here is called the cleanup layer, and all it does, it takes a duplicate of the first layer. So I like to do that. So you can see here at the bottom right hand corner we have a piece of the clamshell showing. Sorry, that's the left, and then this is the right. Now depending on how much of it is in the frame, I can just simply scale the photo and that gets rid of it. So see, just by scaling it gets rid of it. But another technique is generative fill. So if I realize that it's scaling it, I'm going to lose too much of the photo. I'll just use generative fill. So I'll just simply grab the lasso tool, highlight the area, it becomes a selection, and then you go ahead and you just press the space bar, or you just press a full stop and you hit enter. And by doing so, generative fill is gonna pretty much match it back to that background. So, you know, sometimes I do that. So I'm going to use the generative fill now so you can see how it works. But in this case, I didn't necessarily need to. But as you can see, the generative fill did a great job. That has been replaced to match the background of the shoot. Alright, so now that we've done our generative fill on this photo, what I like to do is to pretty much merge the image all over again. So to do that, I'm using a Mac, so I'm going to press Command, Option, Shift, and E. And what that does, it takes a copy of all the layers before and merges it into one, but without flattening the image. On Windows, I'm sure it would be something maybe like Control, Alt, Option, E, because they're typically around that. And now that I have that one layer, I'm going to delete these two layers because I don't need them anymore, and I have everything in one. And I'm going to rename this layer to layer 1 because I'm going to be using frequency separation next, and the frequency separation requires this layer to be called layer 1. That's how the action is set up. So for my cleanup layer, all I'm typically doing, I'm using the remove tool, and I'm just removing those small blemishes. I like to keep this brush very small, this remove brush very small, so it doesn't change up the area too much. You can also use the patch tool, and you just pretty much highlight the area and replace it with another part of the skin. But sometimes for speed, I just prefer to use the remove tool. It works pretty well, especially for these small things. So I like to zoom in on the face, and I'm just looking for anything that I consider to be imperfection, and I'm just removing them. All right, now that I've finished with the blemish removal on the face, I now look at the hairline. So typically you'll have these strands of hair sticking out. So there are a few ways to fix this, but my favorite way of fixing it is to just use the clone stamp tool. Now what I'll typically do, I'll make a copy of this layer, so if I mess up, I can come back. So I just hit Command J, made a copy of the layer, and I'm going to make the changes to my layer. So I use a clone stamp tool. I tap a section of the background that is closest to the hair but not too close, just to get that stamp, and then all I'm going to do, I'm going to use that to pretty much brush out the edges of the strands of hair. Alright, so now that I'm actually finished with the hair removal, I'm going to do the frequency separation. Now the reason why I typically like to do the hair removal before the frequency separation is I don't want to deal with that in the frequency separation layer, right? So I like to get that all cleaned up as best as possible. And also I like to use the frequency separation to fix my background. Another way to fix the background is also with generative fill, but sometimes it can be a hit or miss, especially if I'm dealing with a bunch of, maybe I need to give the client 5 photos. Generative fill could change the background each time, so I prefer to just manually fix the background. And when I say the background, if you look at the image here, you can see that the paper has a bit of wrinkles in it, so I'm going to get out those wrinkles and get it to look as evenly toned out as possible, right? So I'm going to get into the frequency separation, and with my action that I have, this has to be called layer 1. Remember, I'd actually made a copy just so I could remove the hair. So I'm going to delete the first one, and the new one that I made the changes to that I like, I rename that to layer 1. And I simply go to my predefined actions and I hit that. So now it has created the frequency separation layer. And what I'm going to do next, I like to make a copy of the color, because one of these is going to be the background image, which is pretty much the backdrop, and the other one is the skin. Now what frequency separation does, it allows you to be able to, you know, smooth out the skin without losing the texture of the skin. It's a technique that has been around for quite some time, and there are a bunch of tutorials on it, but if you want me guys to show you, you know, the step by step as to how it works, I can get into that on another tutorial. But for right now, let's assume you know it, or if it's your first time seeing it, just watch along as the magic happens, right? So I have my background layer. I like to start with the background. It's pretty much the one that takes the most time. I have my brush here, and I set the wet to 10, and I set the load to 100 because I want this to be completely, you know, straightened out. I'm just going to increase my brush size. I like to also clean my brush just to make sure it's good. And I'm going to start with the outer edges with a big brush, and I'm rubbing in a circular motion so it can have that smooth look. The reason I'm starting with the outer edges in this bigger brush is if when you start to rub too close to the skin or the subject, you're going to end up blending the subject with the background. I don't want to do that. So I'm starting here on the outer edges, and I'm rubbing in a circle so it has a smooth look. I don't want to be rubbing, you know, left to right or up and down so it looks untidy. It's kind of like painting. So I'm pretty much repainting this background to make it smooth, and already you can see the difference happening. If you look at the outer edges, you can see out here is smooth, in here is still rough. That's fine. So I'm trying to get it as close as possible, right? Now, as I get closer to my subject, that's when I'm going to decrease my brush size because I don't want them to blend with my background. And I'm not using any fancy device, right? I'm just using my mouse and my keyboard to get this done. So as I get closer to the skin, that's what I'm doing. Now you'll find that as you get closer to the skin, you might not be able to do the circles, but you want to try circles as best as possible, right? All right, there we go. So as you guys are watching me do this frequent separation, here's another tip. The lens in studio, when in studio, you want to increase your f-stop. So don't shoot wide open because you want to get as much of the subject in focus as possible. So for this shoot, I shot at around 5.6 or 6.3, and the lens that I was using for this headshot was the 70 to 200. But honestly, you can actually get this done with a 24 to 70. The thing about being in studio is that bulk and those things don't matter as much. What matters is the sharpness of the image. So you could get, you know, pretty much a regular 24 to 70 or 28 to 75 or 28 to 70, whatever they are called these days, and you'd still be able to get great quality. I just find that the 70 to 200, you know, when it's zoomed into about 85, it gives a nice portrait look. And again, remember, the bokeh isn't important. What's important is the sharpness of the image. So if you look at my image, you'll see that from the arms all the way to the face, everything is sharp and in focus. And that's because I increased my f-stop. I didn't shoot wide open. That was a mistake I made early on where I was shooting wide open, and yeah, the face would just fall off or the hair would just fall off. You know, and that was just me as a beginner. And after I did it for the first shoot, I realized, oh no, this definitely is not the case, right? So as you see here, the background is already looking much better. So this is the before, it was wrinkled. This is after. The background is done nice, smooth. And because I rubbed in circles, I was able to maintain the consistency of the light. And if I rub from left to right, I would be mixing the highlights with the shadows, and you know, it would be obvious that it was a bit rubbed. But by rubbing it in circles, it makes it look like it's a nice painted background, because that's what you're really doing frequent separation. You're painting. Now, having my background layer, I keep the colors layer separate, right? So I'm gonna actually, in this setup, because I didn't touch the skin, I'm just gonna use the background layer to do one thing. But what I could have done in this case is I can simply say remove background, and by doing so, the layer is using the background below it. And because they're identical, that's how it works, right? So sometimes I end up just doing everything on my original background image. The reason I actually make a copy is just in case I make a mistake, I can always just delete that layer and make another copy. But in this case, I didn't make a mistake, so I could have just done everything on the background image. But for tutorial purposes, all I'm doing is going back to my original color copy, and I select remove background. So now it's using the background for the layer below. Now for frequency separation, what you're basically doing, you're pretty much painting the image. That's the easiest way to describe it. But if the brush is, if the wet is too high, it flattens the face very quickly. I think that's the wrong layer. So if I go here, you see it flattens the face very quickly. So I don't want that. You see how messy that looks? Right, that looks super messy. And so the mistake that people make is they have the wet too high and then the face looks fake, because anywhere you paint it's gonna flatten. So I like to keep mine pretty low. So my wet, I don't pass 1%, and the load, because this image is such a high quality image already and I want it to seem as natural as possible, I'm just gonna set my load to maybe 40%, sometimes even 30%, because I want, as I'm using it, it's barely noticeable. So I like to do that. So what you want to do is rub darks with darks, lights with lights. So in other words, you rub the shadow areas first, and you rub the highlight areas after, and then you kind of find a way to blend them. For me, I like to rub everything in a circular motion. I mean, I think that's how I see the ladies putting on their makeup anyway, so I like to rub that way so it comes across natural, right? So you can zoom in on the image and you just start brushing. So you may not be able to see the difference immediately until you do the before and after. So I'm just rubbing the dark areas first, or you know what they would say, mixing the dark areas first before I get into the light areas. And if you think you're not seeing anything, what you can do is just zoom out, do a before, after, and you can see the subtle change. As I said, I'm trying to keep it as natural as possible, right? You see the changes there, but it's quite subtle, and that's how I like to do mine, so it has that natural look. So if you notice, I'm not rubbing into the highlights yet, I'm just rubbing the darker areas, or they call it the burn areas. And I'm not necessarily rubbing everywhere, I'm just rubbing a few places, because anywhere you rub the brush, it flattens. But because my brush is set to so low right now, mine is more refining the makeup that's already there, or making everything look, you know, almost flawless. And that's the idea. I like to use a natural look. I don't want the image to look almost like plastic because of how much frequency separation was applied. You should look at the face and you shouldn't be able to tell that, you know, a lot of retouching was done or any retouching was done at all. At least that's how I like it, right? Everybody likes their stuff their own way. So as I'm looking at this image, remember I said earlier, the highlights in the face right here, it was just too much for me. But because I know the type of camera I'm using the Sony a7 IV, I know that I can, you know, recover these highlights. But there's actually two ways to do it, and I'm going to show them to you right now. So let's look at the before and after. This is the after, this is the before. See, subtle to the face, but I haven't touched the highlight area as yet. So let me rub the highlight area, and then I'll get into how we can fix the highlight. And as you see, as I start to rub, sometimes as you start to rub, the highlight area starts to fix itself. But as you see, look at this, I'm rubbing the white into the white. It's messy. So I'm going to undo all that, and I'm going to do it again with a smaller circumference this time, because I don't want to spread the highlights all the way too far. So I just want to smooth out the highlights right here in this area. All right, there we go. Now you see it's a big obvious highlight, so clearly I got that wrong. So I'm going to undo, and you will have to do this sometimes, guys. Sometimes you have to undo until you find what you're looking for. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to increase my brush size so it has a better spread, and I'm not going to rub too much. I'm just going to barely rub so the highlight doesn't spread beyond that area too much, because I don't want it too much. Now we have this obvious highlight. Now I like to fix this by just creating a new layer, and I call this like my color fixing. You can call it anything you want, right? Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a brush. So I take a sample of an area closest to the skin right there, and I get my brush tool, and I pretty much paint over that area in the form of a circle. Now it's going to look messy at first, like this, yes. But then you see it's quite obvious. So what you do next is you decrease the opacity, and you can also change the blend. I think you can change it to like I believe soft light. Yeah, soft light is the one that blends it. And then now you can increase the opacity to get rid of how much you want to get rid of. Sometimes I don't change the blend, sometimes I just leave it at normal and I just play the opacity. In this case, I'm just playing the opacity. So as you can see, it looks better. This is now, this is before. See, I'm toning on the highlight a bit. And I'm going to increase opacity some more because I don't want to see it. And then what I'll do, I'll probably just brush it some more because I want to blend it with the rest of the skin. And so now we have it coming along better. Now in the post, I can now come back and see if I can fix this up. If you're not pleased with how it looks, you can always just make another color layer and do it all over again. So in this case, sometimes I like to try it again just to get it the right way. So in this case, I want to try it again. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get my brush tool and I'm going to do my best to paint it again. I'm going to try with a smaller area instead of it spreading all over. And then I'm going to decrease the opacity. Alright, there we go. So that looks much better than the first one. So this is the first one, this is the second one. I like the second one more, and it still has a little bit of the highlight, which is what I want to see. Now some people will do dodge and burn here, but for me, I'm already good with how the image looks, so I'm not necessarily going to do, you know, the dodge and burn technique because I like what I'm seeing so far. And as you can see, we were able to fix the highlight here just by using that brush. You know, we got some of the skin tone back here, and I didn't increase the opacity too much because I still wanted a bit of the highlight to shine through. So that's why I didn't do like all the way here. I put it at about, this one is at about 45 or 50%, and it's just done to your taste, right? So I have an image that I'm comfortable with. I like how it looks. All I'm going to do now is color this image. But before I do so, I sometimes like to touch up the eyes a bit. The action that I'm using right now, they have an action for the eyes, and I'm actually going to be using that. So be sure to make sure that when you're applying a new action, your frequency separation folder is closed and you're applying the action above. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be brightening up the eyes a bit. So right here we have the catch light. I'll just add a little bit more light there. I'll brighten up here. It's going to seem overly exposed at first, but all I'm doing, I just want to be able to see what I'm doing, and then when I'm done, I'm going to go and decrease the opacity on this layer to maybe 50%. And it's a subtle change, but you see it makes the eyes a bit brighter. That's the idea right there. So it seems nice and bright but not fake. So I have that at about 40%. So now the eyes are more catching. This is with the eyes catching. This is the before, after. Before, after. These subtle changes make a difference. I'm also going to do the teeth. I like to use that same action that I use for the eyes to do the teeth. And all I'm doing is just brushing over the teeth right here. Adding some teeth whitening. And she has nice teeth already anyways. And then I just decrease the opacity. See, just slight changes. So as you can see, before, after, slight changes. I'll decrease this some more because I don't want it to be overpowered. So that's a slight glow to the teeth right there. So image looks nice already. We could actually give this image to the client as is. I'm gonna merge these layers into one, so I'll highlight the eyes, the teeth, all those are the modifications I made. and I convert this to a smart object because I'm going to be doing some coloring. So this is after, this is before. This is where it's coming from. After, before, after, before. So I'm going to actually color this image. So once we have converted that to the final object, which is the smart object, I'm going to go to filter, and I like to color in camera raw. So we have this nice image. I typically like to use mask to affect certain parts of the image, and for this I like to bring in my contrast first, and of course you're coloring to your taste, but I like to do the contrast first because I want the skin to look a little bit richer. And what I'm going to do is decrease the highlights a bit. See, I could play the highlights. And when it comes down to coloring, sometimes I'll just drag this and just do this to see what it does, and then I'll find something that I like. So it's no like these are the steps to do this. It's just you moving around an image until the image looks appealing to you. And it's important to have a good monitor when doing that. I'm coloring this right now on my Mac. The monitor for me is quite good, that comes on the Mac. So that can also affect your image. I'm coloring in the sRGB color space as well, so those things play a part in the image. So as I said, I like how this image looks. Sometimes I'll turn this down, I don't want that. So it's a process. But the light is the first thing I play with. Like I said, I'll bump up the contrast. I'll probably bring down the blacks, and due to her skin tone, black, reducing the blacks actually increases the richness in her skin tone. So I'll do that. I'll sometimes decrease the shadows to kind of add more drama to it. So as you see, by decreasing the shadows, it makes the image a bit darker. So the shadow areas become darker and the image starts to seem like it's popping more. So this is how it looks now. This is how I came in. So a subtle change, just by darkening the tones a bit, I'm getting it to pop more, right? I don't really touch the saturation because saturation changes the skin, so I won't touch that unless I want to decrease the saturation, but in most cases I don't. Vibrance affects the overall image, the tones, but it's going to also impact the skin. There's a way to fix that, but I'm not going to touch the vibrance. In this case, I have little or nothing to do. Now the background, I may want to darken it a bit, so I'll go to the mask and I select background. I know that I have the background highlighted. I'll increase the contrast because I want to darken the background a bit, right? So I'm going to put that at 20. So this is the small change to the background. So I just wanted the background to be a little bit darker so she can pop more, but you don't have to. That's also a creative choice. So you see, because I already did most of the work by shooting the image properly, I have little or nothing to do right here in this edit. I can actually say that, this is complete. I may work on the skin tone a bit, but it's pretty much complete. What I'm going to do, I'm going to move the vibrance up a bit, and I know it's going to impact the skin tone. I'm moving the vibrance because I want her shirt to seem a bit richer. So I'm moving the vibrance until it's rich enough. Another way I could actually impact this is to use the hue and saturation layers. So I can find the blues and target the blues. Don't want to do the hue because the hue would change the color. What I want to do is the saturation, so it increases the richness of the color. So by doing that, I just change the richness. If you feel like the skin is not the way you want it to, the good thing is that with the hue and saturation layer, there's a thing called point color over here. You can select point color, then you can sample the area that you want to sample, and now it allows you to change that tone. So in this case, this looks a bit too orange, so I'm gonna play with the saturation and desaturate it a bit, play with the luminance. The luminance affects like the lighting, and I'm just going to play around until I get a neutral looking skin tone. So that seems a bit more neutral to me, just slight changes, not too much. But yeah, that's it guys. I don't think I need to do pretty much anything else to this image. I believe this image is complete. by adding a little bit of darkness, I was able to make it a little bit more dramatic. See, I just a contrast, just a contrast, and this image is complete. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you like this tutorial and you'd like me to get into more tutorials, you can leave your comments. You can look at my Instagram page at Paradise Pixels JM. It's actually in the comment in the description. And if you see an image there and you're wondering how did I edit that image or how I did the shot, you can always comment, let me know, and I'll see if I can find a raw file and re-edit that image to show you what I've been doing in my process. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. See you next time.